Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. We have a great webinar on tap, as always, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for our speakers, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions. And we will try to get to as many questions as we can before the end of today's webinar. And also at the end of today's webinar, we are doing a drawing for two $50 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 2 lucky winners. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is building resilient applications using Cloudflare DNS. Our speakers today are Dina Kozlov, who is a product manager at Cloudflare, and Christopher Shelley, who is solutions engineer at Cloudflare. Welcome to you both. Thanks so much for joining me today. Dina, I know you're there, and I know you have a great presentation on tap, so I'm going to put myself on mute and just let you get right to it.
Sounds great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. As Charlene said, my name is Dina Kozlov, and I'm the product manager for Managed DNS at Cloudflare. And today I have Chris Shelley with me, who is a solutions engineer and also our subject matter expert for DNS. And today we'll be talking about how you can build resilient applications using Cloudflare's DNS. First, we're going to take a step back and give you an overview of Cloudflare and what we do. Then we'll talk about DNS and market trends, our DNS product offering, and how our customers are using it today. And then I'll pass it off to Chris, who will demo the dashboard, and we'll have some time in the end for questions. Now, before we dive into what Cloudflare is and what we provide, let's take a step back and talk about the internet. What started as a way for universities to connect with one another has evolved into a global platform for businesses and communications and a way to host a wide variety of critical applications. The internet has become an essential and critical part of businesses, especially during these times. Not only is it important to provide the essential infrastructure for applications and networks, as a business, you also have to enable and secure your own workforce, especially for those who are working remotely. The internet was not designed to deliver security, millisecond performance, and the reliability that's required now. Instead, organizations are constantly worrying about protecting their applications from DDoS attacks, malicious bots, network congestion, and service disruptions. As a business, your site visitors expect you to always be online, have low latency, total reliability, and high levels of security and privacy. To meet evolving expectations and navigate the limitations of the internet, businesses have traditionally relied on a broad array of hardware devices deployed in an on-premise data center to deliver functions such as VPN, firewall, routing, traffic optimization, load balancing, and other network services. These Band-Aid boxes were meant to patch the internet and address its core limitations. While the Band-Aid boxes added some benefits, they contributed to massive complexity, cost, technical debt, and a tangled web of dependencies. Band-Aid boxes are expensive. They cost a lot in the terms of capital expenditures. On one hand, there's a hardware cost from deploying specialized hardware, but it actually costs a lot more in terms of the people who have to manage these solutions. The network hardware boxes worked for a while for on-premise deployments and in the early days of the internet. But we've drastically scaled since then, and application deployment has changed. The technology industry has been undergoing a transition from on-premise hardware and software that customers buy to services in the cloud that they rent. Application storage and compute have already moved to the cloud, and the network layer is now transitioning as well. According to a Forrester survey, 75% of organizations use at least one cloud provider, and 54% have already adopted multi-cloud or hybrid cloud environments. You can't put Band-Aid boxes in the cloud. Instead, we need to be able to provide a global platform that delivers security, performance, and reliability across on-premise, public cloud, hybrid cloud, and SaaS applications. Cloudflare is taking the Band-Aid boxes and turning it into a service so that it can be available to anyone in a way that's easy to use, but also easy to scale. Cloudflare is a global cloud platform that delivers a broad range of network services to businesses of all sizes around the world, making them more secure, enhancing their performance of their critical applications, and eliminating the cost and complexity of managing and integrating individual network hardware. We provide businesses with a scalable, easy-to-use, unified control plane to deliver security, performance, and reliability across our customers' applications. Our mission is to help build a better internet. Cloudflare's network has the breadth and scale that organizations need to run their applications. We now have more than 200 points of presence around the world. And not only that, but we also run our full stack for all of our products and services on every server in every data center, improving our network for customers no matter where they are located. Our comprehensive platform includes products for security, performance, and reliability in one unified solution. We're able to do that by sitting in front of your internet application. When a good visitor visits a web property, we can quickly recognize that it's a good visitor, and we provide accelerated performance for the end user. Bots and crawlers can be good and bad. We recognize a good versus a bad crawler at the edge and allow access or deny access based on the nature of the bot or crawler. Attackers are blocked at the edge, so your web properties are protected at all times. Once you've onboarded your DNS to Cloudflare, setting up the rest is extremely easy. Dynamic IPs are assigned to every domain to route traffic to the Cloudflare network. Origin IPs are obscured and can be secured with access control lists or by cycling IP ranges. Now I'm going to pass it off to Chris to talk a bit more about DNS.
All right, so let's go ahead and talk about DNS. And really, when we look at DNS and how DNS operates in terms of a digital 21st century strategy. Next slide. The problem that you're going to run into anytime that you're dealing with legacy or on-prem hardware is that all the money that you've invested in your firewalls, in your security, in your circuits, everything that you put into making sure that your services are up and available, that they're responsive, none of that matters if your DNS fails. DNS has become so critical to the way that the internet works as a whole that if you do not have a resilient plan for your DNS, then your services are always going to be vulnerable. And when we look at the impact of what a weak DNS strategy looks like, almost always when I'm dealing with customers who have on-prem infrastructure and they come to Cloudflare and they say, how can I modernize my current strategy? How can I move forward with a more resilient plan? The first thing I tell them is if you're running externally facing DNS in-house, effectively you're no longer doing it correctly. That is absolutely a vulnerability point for you. In terms of security, it's a weak link in your infrastructure. All of your services reside on DNS. You have this broadcasted IP that's now being seen around the world. Your DNS lives on that IP. It becomes a very easy way for attackers to send amplification attacks, to use DNS as a vulnerability point to bring down other components of your network. And so from a security standpoint, it just simply no longer makes a lot of sense, especially with how resilient and how strong other external DNS providers have become. Additionally, you're taking a significant performance hit. You're almost single-homed, certainly. You're running DNS on-prem. Anyone who's coming inbound making DNS requests is going to be coming back into your infrastructure to get an answer before they can connect somewhere, wherever that place may be. And so from a performance standpoint, you're not using any of the current technologies that many of the authoritative providers give you out of the gate. So things like anycasted BGP routing, having multiple different data centers at geographically diverse locations to provide resiliency, making sure that there's no congestion and routing traffic around the internet to prevent particular websites or particular, data centers from having issues. And then lastly, you're looking at reliability. And you really have to ask yourself, do I want my internal infrastructure to be limited by this one core piece of technology that I simply can't remove? And from a reliability standpoint, all of your other services live, and all your websites and every single host name that anyone ever types into a browser lives in some way on DNS, and it needs some IP to resolve to. And from a reliability standpoint, you have to ask yourself, do I want this single point of failure to be the one thing that's holding back a very rigid and robust infrastructure that I've built? Next slide. And so when we look at how do we build the enterprise DNS strategy that moves forward, that modernizes and comes into the 21st century, what does that look like? So a lot of the time I'm dealing with customers who they have in-house DNS, And so they come to us and they look for some strategy or some path forward. And this is pretty much the strategy that I give them. So you're in-house, you have on-prem DNS, you're maintaining some sort of infrastructure, bind, info block, something of that nature. It resides in your DMZ or behind the corporate firewall. You've got slow resolution for query traffic. You don't have a ton of insight into the way that your DNS performs. You're very vulnerable to attacks and other types of malicious activity. And the first step or the first transition is usually moving towards a single managed provider. So that means I want to get the DNS infrastructure out of my on-prem system into some sort of authoritative that exists in the cloud. And it doesn't really matter who. Almost all of the cloud providers today are going to give you significant benefits in terms of better speed and protection. So for one, they've built out infrastructures that are more resilient to large volumetric style attacks that happen in DNS. And large DNS amplification attacks are very common. Attacks that can easily exceed 100 gigabit per second. Right? Very, very few people have purchased circuits that can withstand that kind of volume. Two, it offers redundancy. Almost universally, they all have some kind of anycasted architecture so that if a particular location goes down, they can route traffic across multiple other locations. So you're not vulnerable to one specific ISP or one specific location having congestion or problems. And then in addition, you're probably going to gain some insights into analytics, how your DNS is performing, what your average query and response times are, where your traffic volumes are coming from, and then usually some role-based access or some user monitoring that comes associated with that, that gives you a user interface or something else that someone can log into from around the world. And especially now that we're dealing with this work at home situation where people are very diverse and they're not centralized in one location, not having to VPN in can be a very easy way for people who are working in different locations to be able to access your DNS and make dynamic changes. And then lastly, as we look beyond the managed single provider setup, managed single providers do solve the performance issue and they help to solve the security issue. But the reliability issue is still there. Any single DNS vendor that you choose, you always are going to be vulnerable in the sense that if that DNS vendor has an outage or if there's some problem, if there's some security issue or vulnerability, they may be something that becomes a liability for your other services to be active and work. And almost every DNS vendor that I can think of in the last 10 years has had some sort of DNS related issue. So a multi-DNS strategy is usually the conclusion of this phase. And that means that you're either moving into some sort of hidden master with multiple secondaries that are set up, which we'll talk about a little bit in a few other slides, or you're running some sort of multi-master configuration, which we'll also talk about. The idea here is that we no longer want a single DNS provider to be a sole source of failure. By running multiple providers in tandem, DNS has this very naturally nice thing that it does in terms of failover, where if a DNS provider's name servers stop responding, DNS will naturally select whatever NS records can respond. And so we have a strategy here that looks to solve all three of those issues with a final component where we look at a multiple DNS setup. Next slide, please. So I want to talk through a little bit about what these setups look like and what this transition plan actually looks like in terms of more refined detail. So let's start with authoritative DNS, and then also hidden master are sort of identical. So in authoritative DNS, we're going to take all of our zone files that exist currently inside of our own infrastructure, and we're going to move them to some authoritative provider. In this sense, what we're giving up is we're giving away local control, but we're gaining all of the benefits that come with having an authoritative provider. All the speed, the resiliency, the security that comes with it. Hopefully you're getting a provider that has role-based access, additionally some audit logs or something else that can track users and how they're making changes. But typically the other nice thing about this is you're also getting some ability to make changes that propagate fairly quickly. So for example, in Cloudflare, any changes you make in our UI or via our API are going to happen in about 30 seconds or less. That's pretty common across most of the major DNS providers today. Changes you make are going to propagate to their edge very, very quickly. So you have much more fast response times in that area. And from authoritative DNS, someone is going to give you a set of new name servers. You're going to remove your old name servers that exist at your registrar, and these new name servers are going to become your authoritatives. That's where you're going to make all your changes, and everything is going to be done through this provider. Next slide, please. So in a hidden master configuration, what you've decided is I don't want to give up control. I want all the performance benefit, the resiliency, everything that comes with having a authoritative provider that's not my own, inside my own infrastructure, but I don't quite want to yet give up control. And there could be a number of reasons for that. One could be that you've got really nice ticketing system or some sort of other integration that maintains or changes your DNS based on some policy or something else that happens externally, or even internally, something that modifies what those DNS records look via some API you've written. That's perfectly fine. You can absolutely maintain that and maintain that structure and use a hidden master to be what services those records externally. And so in here, what you would have is some zone administrator has a hidden master configuration, so some piece of infrastructure on-prem, but you lock it down, you completely harden it, so that the only thing that can ever make a request into it is the hidden master itself, which does what's called an AXFR process to grab fresh copies of the zone every time they receive a notification there's a change, and then import it directly into their systems. The hidden master will create copies of the updated zone file. The secondary will receive updated copies of that zone file. And then in terms of the way the world sees this behavior, the site visitors or people who are making DNS requests, the only thing that they will ever see is the secondary DNS provider as authoritative. So as far as they know, all the changes are being made there, but yet you're still maintaining control. Next slide, please. So those two previous situations that I described are that first initial launching point, moving into some authoritative DNS provider in the cloud. As we start to move into multi-DNS provider strategies, this is where we start looking at more primary and secondary configurations. And so this would be something where you purchase one provider who can act as a primary, and then you would set up a secondary and another provider who would extract records from that primary as you make changes. So you'd have one central place where you would make all those changes. So one provider that you would choose to be primary, you would make changes in their UI or in their API, and then those changes would automatically propagate naturally to the secondary DNS provider. The site visitors see both NS records listed hosting the zone. So they see both the primary DNS and secondary DNS as responding to answers. And as far as they're concerned, if the primary DNS vendor goes out, not a problem. Secondary DNS vendor is right there to take over. Secondary DNS vendor goes out, there's some issue, there's some problem, not an issue. Primary DNS vendor is right there for you to be able to handle those queries as they come in. Next slide. And so the last strategy that I want to talk about is something that's come up more and more recently as I deal with large enterprises, Fortune 500s, or large federal government agencies. Multi-master is a strategy that is by far the most technical debt incurring strategy, but it also offers a lot of benefits that you may not have thought of or may not have considered. So in a multi-master strategy, you now have two places that are authoritative. You have to go in and make changes in a primary DNS vendor and another primary DNS vendor. So there's no secondary, there's no stitching between the some primary and secondary DNS. These are being managed simultaneously. And so to do this, you would need Terraform or Denominator or some other type of technology to help make sure that these are in sync. You can also write to dual APIs if you want. So if both providers have an API, you can ship out simultaneous calls to both their APIs to update. And the reason that I'm seeing this strategy become more and more popular is that there's limitations in secondary. So for example, if you're using GSLB capability and you're using anything like failover or geographic steering in DNS or health checking and monitoring that's occurring inside of your authoritative, that's not something that will transfer as part of a secondary process. Those records do not exist inside of secondary DNS. There's not inside of any sort of AXFR process that will capture them. So if you want to maintain that, if you want to have load balancing in place, or you want to have health checking and monitoring or some sort of geographic steering, multi-master is one way that you can accomplish that. You can set up both providers to have those services ingrained inside them, and then you just update them simultaneously. But it is, as I mentioned before, it is a strategy that requires the most DevOps work. You will have to do some sort of integration with Terraform or APIs or something else to make sure that both of these vendors get updated simultaneously, because right now they have no way to have any sort of communication between them. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about Cloudflare's managed DNS platform. Next slide. So what do we do? What can Cloudflare help with? So from an authoritative standpoint, that's absolutely something that we do. We have customers in authoritative DNS every day, onboarding to us every day, every moment of every day. From authoritative DNS, we have 200 points of presence around the globe where we're doing our anycasted announcement. We have one of the fastest DNS platforms out there. We can help you with role-based user access, limiting control, setting up auditing, setting up notifications and other things around changes that are being made. That's all inside of the authoritative DNS platform. And then in addition to that, we also support secondary DNS. So as you have a multi-DNS strategy, we can absolutely act as a secondary that pulls in copies of logs from some other primary that's out there. And we fully can support you if you want to make a transition into multi-master. If that's something that you're considering or something that you've thought about doing in the past, that is a situation where we can come in. We have direct integrations with Terraform. We work with Denominator. We have APIs and have helped customers integrate with our APIs in order to support those kinds of configurations. And so if this is something that you're interested in pursuing, this is one of the ways that we can come in and we can help you better understand, how do I make a multi-master configuration work? And then lastly, we do have a product called DNS Firewall. So DNS Firewall is basically just a DNS relay. It sits in front of some DNS infrastructure on-prem that you have. And what it actually works as is almost a caching server. So someone makes a request, they only see the DNS Firewall answers as what exists to the public. We will answer if we have it in cache. If we don't, we'll reach back to the origin. It's not quite as synced up as secondary DNS is. So it's not something where like the DNS firewall is receiving a notification every time there's a change. It's just that DNS firewall responds with whatever's in its cache. And then if it can't find it, it will go back to the origin server or back to the true source of where the DNS queries are answered from, and we'll ask it to provide a DNS answer, and then we'll cache it there. So it's not always synced up. It does require some pullback there. Next slide. So we do offer an enterprise-grade managed DNS service. It gives you the fast response time, all of the redundancy pieces we've talked about, and all this advanced security pieces we talked about. We do support things like SSO as well, I should mention. So if there is something where you want like single sign-on or some integration with like an IDP vendor, we can support that in terms of limiting scope of access. Next slide.
Now, let's look at what the Cloudflare difference looks like for customers with different requirements. When it comes to DNS, it is incredibly important that your DNS server does not go down. If it does, your customers will not be able to reach your site. For some businesses, an outage like this can be very expensive. It's important for organizations to use DNS providers that have a large global network of DNS nodes. So if one node fails, queries can continue to get resolved in all the other ones. This is where our global Anycast network differentiates us. With over 200 nodes serving DNS queries, it has allowed us to stay online and has kept us from having a global outage for DNS in the last 6 years. As I mentioned, we do resolve DNS queries in each one of our data centers. And not only does this improve redundancy, it is also the reason why our customers benefit from superior performance. Our Cloudflare Edge delivers 11 millisecond DNS lookup speed on average, and DNS record changes propagate in under 5 seconds to all 200 plus cities. One of our customers is a large digital platform that hosts their own customer sites. They have over 3 million DNS records on one zone, and those records change as frequently as every 30 seconds. However, for them, that doesn't make a difference because we continue to propagate their DNS records in less than 5 seconds to our entire edge. This also helps our customers who are located in multiple geographical regions because low query times are consistent around the world. Now let's talk about security. A common question that we get from our customers inquiring about DNS is how much do we charge for DNSSEC and DDoS mitigation? Fun fact, we don't. At Cloudflare, we believe that security should be baked into our product. That is why we include DDoS mitigation as a part of our DNS solution for no extra cost. Additionally, we do the same thing for DNSSEC. DNSSEC adds a layer of security to an otherwise insecure protocol by using cryptographic signatures. It has traditionally been difficult to configure, and we wanted to change that. That's why we offer free one-click DNSSEC for all of our customers. And for our customers that are using Cloudflare Registrar, we will automatically upload the delegation signer record for you. So it really is just one click for added security. Let's talk about onboarding and configuration support. When changing DNS providers, it is critical that no DNS records were left behind. This is why we offer tools such as our DNS scan, which finds your DNS records from your current provider. And in addition to that, we offer our customers a way to upload their zone files so that we hold an identical copy as your previous DNS provider. In our dashboard, we recently upgraded the user interface of our DNS table to have an added record change confirmation so that you can double check every change before committing it. For our customers that like to use APIs, we've made it easy to migrate DNS records and zones in bulk. And for our secondary DNS customers, we've just added an onboarding UI, making the setup extremely fast and easy and allowing you to see your DNS records transfer over before you've added Cloudflare's name service. Lastly, analytics. For both our authoritative and secondary DNS customers, we offer granular analytics. The analytics show a breakdown of DNS traffic by record type, response code, and even geographical regions, and span from the last 30 minutes to the last month. This way, you can get insight into where your traffic is coming from and how it's getting distributed between different DNS providers. One of our customers, Big Cartel, is an e-commerce platform that allows artists and brands to open a store. They use our secondary DNS product to eliminate any chances of downtime, and they're very fond of our secondary DNS analytics, which allows them to understand how traffic is balanced between us and their other DNS provider. Analytics can help businesses optimize their infrastructure and their costs. Technology leaders want to take proactive measures, and data allows them to do that. And once again, this is something that's baked into our product at no additional cost. Here are the main features that we offered. As I mentioned, free one-click DNSSEC and built-in DDoS mitigation is available to all of our customers at no additional cost. We've also built out our APIs and UIs to make it as easy as possible to configure and manage your DNS records, while taking extra measures to make sure that you're not making accidental record changes. For our enterprise customers, we support an unlimited amount of DNS queries and even millions of DNS records. Additionally, our enterprise customers get the benefits of premium support so you can migrate with zero downtime. We offer custom name servers, and we also offer role-based access controls. And now I'm going to pass it off to Chris to demo our dashboard.
So in here, what I'm showcasing right now is just what a blanket level account would look like on Cloudflare. You have the account right here. Any additional accounts that you would have would be selected from a drop-down menu. Additionally, in here, you can look at all of the different zones that you have. You can search for those zones as well. Here, you can also search for any particular zone that you would like to find. So there is contextual-based switching. So as I type in, it will string complete anything that matches it, and will basically on a wildcard based level. So here I'm looking for this particular zone, and I can click on that zone and I can pull it up. You'll see the moment you come into this particular website, you'll notice that it'll have some information around proxy settings that are set up. So how many requests and percent cache, those types of things. But really for today, what we're really focused on is just the DNS only component. So in the DNS only component, you'll notice immediately all of the records are listed here in alphabetical order, sorted by type. So I can continue to scroll down and look for particular records that I want. I can also move over if there are more records that can be showcased at one time. But you'll see A records start first and then C names, and all of them are listed out. That's not a very efficient method for searching. So if I want, I can start doing the same contextual complete that I showed earlier, and I can just search for a particular record or host name that I'm looking for. And this will search both the name as well as the content. So it'll do a match for any string that matches this in both the name and content. And then once I'm here, you'll notice that there's this proxy status that's shown. In Cloudflare, we have two types of statuses. One is DNS only, and the other is proxied. So for this demonstration in particular, we're only really caring about DNS only. So that is what we call gray clouded. Anything that we orange cloud is proxied, meaning that we rewrite this content and we insert a Cloudflare IP over top of it, so that now we become the edge that the customer connects to versus actually just serving up the DNS entry itself. Adding a record here is pretty straightforward. I can just simply click on the add a record option. I can choose the type of record that I want to add. So any of these common ones. And you'll notice that there might be DKIM or some other record types which aren't listed here. That's fine. They're serviced directly out of the TXT record type with no issues. You use the @ symbol to specify the root zone. Otherwise, you can type in any host name you want. And then in addition to that, you can now type in what the IPv4 address is. There is error checking that's built into the platform. So if I try to serve it something that is simply not possible to be included here whatsoever, it will give me an error the moment that I click on this. So it'll tell me, no, this won't work. This is not allowed, which is fine. I just have to make sure that it is something that is allowed. So I would choose some IPv4 address that I would prefer. I can choose the initial proxy status by default if I don't want. So I can simply remove this and say I only want it to be DNS only. You'll notice that there are a bunch of TTL values that you can define here for this particular record. And so you can set those up as needed. Once you're done and you've created your record, you would add it. It would go down in here. You could then search for it. If at any point you decided that you did want to proxy it later, or you wanted to use the proxy service, it's simply just clicking this little button will instantly turn the proxy service on. That happens in about 30 seconds or less from almost anywhere in the world. So it's pretty rapid and pretty fast. Scrolling down a little bit, you'll also see the name servers that are associated with this particular zone. So there are a male and female name issued for any zone that gets added onto Cloudflare, and these are the ones that are provided. It is possible to do custom name servers. So if you wanted your own vanity host names or ns1.domain.com, for example, it is possible to create those, and we can define what those look like for you. And then additionally, DNSSEC, as Dina mentioned, is simply the click of a button. I'll cancel this setup really quick. And then if I click on Enable DNSSEC, what will happen is it will re-sign it with exactly the same records that were there before, but on a new zone, it would pop up with a window that would showcase what the delegation signer record was and a few other pieces of information. And I'll repeat this process in a zone that I onboard in a second to show you what that looks like. We do support CNAME flattening, so you can flatten CNAMEs. With that, effectively, this may be similar to aliasing if you've heard that record. Alias records and CNAME flattening effectively do the same thing. The idea here is that at the root, you're not allowed to have a CNAME. By RFC specification, the root has other records, could be MX records or NS records or something else. So you cannot map a host name to a host name at the apex or at the root. CNAME flattening allows you to do this. What we do is we look up the IP space behind the host name target and we insert those as A records for the root itself. So this can be very, very useful if you're trying to proxy from our authoritative DNS into some other server or some other service, whether it's some other CDN. This can be one way of doing that, and it's very helpful if you're trying to solve that problem. Back at the account level, just really quick, if I go to account home, you'll notice that there are members here that exist, and there are different roles. So I talked about role-based access before. You have super administrator. You can also give an administrator read-only permission so they can see everything but not make changes. You can give them access to analytics, log viewer, billing requirements. You can give them access to only DNS, for example, load balancing, which I'll talk about in a little bit and how that's set up, or any SSL, TLS, any of the proxy settings. You can give all of your users strict permissions around what it is that they can see and do. There's also there's member 2FA enforcement. So we do support two-factor authentication if you want to bind a token to a user. And I did mention before, we do support SSO as well. So both of those things can be done. There is an audit log in here as well for any users that are making requests. So anytime that you make a change or modify something, you can click on this entry. It'll show you the date, the user IP where the request was made from, the zone that it was made on, where it was done via API, user interface, something else, and then a unique identification record that's associated with that particular action. You can download this or extract it via API, or in this case, this button, which generates a CSV, which has all the latest entries defined, and you can go back multiple months to get data and do audit logging and checking. There's a few other things that I should mention just around configurations. So the account name is not static. You can change it if you want to do so. If you're on our registrar platform, you can edit your whois contact information as well. So we're both an authoritative provider and a registrar for many common used .com, .net, for example, many common used names or TLDs. And then one other thing to mention is that if you are on a registrar platform, there are a few other things that we can do that make it very nice to interface with us. So for example, that DNSSEC button I clicked, That'll showcase a few records that you'd have to take to your registrar in order to get synced up. Dina highlighted this earlier, but on us, you'd just be able to click that button on the registrar platform and we'd automatically insert those. Custom pages are here for any errors or anything that we would showcase. So for example, if you were using our proxy, anything that's blocked or if there's black block, 500 class errors, anything like that, there's custom pages that you can deploy. DNS firewall configurations are here if you're using that product. And then secondary DNS. So configuring the masters is what you would do here, as well as any transfer signatures or TSIGs. Those would also be included here. So this is where you would set the masters up. And then in the UI, you would create the zone as a secondary and assign these defined masters to it. And then what I'm going to showcase next is I'm going to go back to the account home and I'm going to add a site and just show you very quickly what that looks like. So by adding a site, I have the ability to choose authoritative DNS or secondary DNS out of the gate. In this case, I'm going to choose my own zone and I'm going to add it as authoritative. And when I do that, I have to select a plan. So we offer a number of different plans. It's perfectly fine to have a free website on Cloudflare, but we do offer pro and business plans for other types of organizations that want to consume services on Cloudflare and have a little bit more in terms of options and different things that we can do. And then lastly, we have Enterprise, which is our highest grade plan reserved for customers that have contracts with us. So I'm going to choose Enterprise for this particular zone, and out of the gate, it will automatically scan for records. It's really important to realize right now that this is not an exhaustive list. What we look for are roughly about the top 200 to 250 so host names that we see used across all the websites on our platform. And for the most part, it's pretty good. It will usually get most of the records that you would have or could think to have, but it's not exhaustive. So it's definitely a case that you would want to check and make sure that this lines up with exactly what you have in your zone file. If these numbers, or if there's any discrepancy and these numbers don't match up one-to-one, you would absolutely want to take a copy of your zone file and upload it. And I'll show you exactly what that looks like in a moment. And then here, you can choose whether you want the DNS records that are added to be proxied or not proxied. That's really up to you in terms of all these. Now, I've added the zone in the past, so it'll automatically default to what the previous status was of those records, which is in this case proxied. So it'll just automatically import that because the zone had previously existed in this account. Something we do to help customers if they accidentally delete a zone or remove a zone from the platform and they want to restore it very quickly, we do keep some memory for a very short amount of time on what the statuses were of the entries that existed in the platform. So you can see here, I can just click off whatever I want. And then once I get to the bottom, I can hit continue. And what it will tell me is what my current registrar is, the name servers that I have associated with that registrar, and what I need to replace those name servers with. And once I do replace those name servers, now the zone is technically on Cloudflare, we'll start receiving traffic and the zone will activate. Before I actually make that migration or make this change, the zone is what we call pending state, meaning any of the changes or modifications I make to the zone are perfectly fine. There's no traffic coming into it, so there's no harm. It's basically play money, so I can onboard the zone, I can set up whatever load balancing records or anything else I'd want without having any issues or problems. It's really only once I add these name servers that you would start to see traffic flow through, and then that would be effectively a production level change. So now I'm done. These are just some proxy settings, whether I want SSL or TLS encryption to exist, whether I want to always use HTTPS. These aren't really relevant for this particular demo, so I'm going to go ahead and just click through these. And so here we go. This is a zone and pending setup. It tells me that I can complete my setup and what that looks like. Once I make these name server changes, there's an automatic backup schedule. So we're automatically looking and doing NS lookups pretty much every 30 seconds to a minute, just to validate that these name servers are being updated. If you wait a significant amount of time, a week to 2 weeks before making these changes, that backup schedule gets longer. And so when you do make that change and you update these name servers, you want to come back in here and click this recheck now button that would automatically activate the site on Cloudflare. And then in the DNS portion, you'll see that all the records that I have here are imported, but it might be the case that some of them weren't captured by the snapshot that I had set up, which is perfectly fine. If the quick scan doesn't get it, I can click on that advanced button, scroll down, and it will tell me that I can import DNS records. I can select a file, in this case, this particular one that I've already pre-built, and I hit open, and then I hit continue, and it will parse the DNS file. And what's nice about it is that it parses it line by line. So for example, all of these records already exist. So it's just going to go through them line by line, and it's going to tell me that they all exist. So you do get a nice little readout of what happened from the file being uploaded. But if there were any that weren't here, so if there were new records that were being added, you would see those located in here. And so any records that existed as part of the scan, we'll just skip those. Any new records will be automatically added, and you would see that those records got added successfully. And that would be spit out in the error log here. And then lastly, Dina talked a little bit about this, but in the analytics tab under DNS, you will see some query volumes and other things surrounding this zone. I'm going to swap out of this zone really quick and go to a zone that does have some queries for you guys to see. And so in here, what I really want to see is I want to see the DNS queries. So you can see DNS queries by response code, which is here. And you might be interested, like, why did this happen? Like, why are there so many queries that happen in this time frame? You can also look and correspond that with DNS query types. So it looked like here a large volume of DNS and A records that were being requested, and a whole bunch of MX records as well during that time frame. And we've color coded each of the different record types here, allocated down to the way the graph looks. And then you can see what were the top queried records over a given time interval, and you can take this back 6 hours, 24 hours, a month, if you want to go that far back, and just look at what were my top query volumes, what host names were being requested. You can also look and see top DNS records returning NX domain. This is actually really important, especially as you move out of anything that's on-premise into the cloud. This becomes a really critical way of understanding, do I have some sort of legacy system that's an internal system that's accidentally making external authoritative queries for a response? Definitely keep track of this. Definitely, when I work with customers, one of the things that we look at is to make sure the NX domain queries are very low, and then we find out the IP sources that are associated with those NX domains to help figure out which systems might accidentally be making external queries when they should be making internal DNS queries. And then, as Dina pointed out, you can see the DNS query volumes broken out by data center. So where those traffic volumes originated from geographically around the world, primarily in the US and Europe in this particular case for this zone, but wherever that would, from any one of the 200 POPs around the world where we would service those DNS queries, you would have little dots that would showcase where that traffic was originating from. And then, of course, we break that out for you. We don't just give you a heat map. We also give you some additional query volumes with absolute numbers here. All of this data that I'm showing you right now, everything associated with the DNS analytics piece, all accessible via API, can be all extracted, downloaded, integrated with some other chartered Grafana or some other system that you might use to build these out. And then the one last thing I do want to show with a few minutes we have is we do support all full GSLB capability. So we do have the ability to do load balancing, health checking and failovering and monitoring on the DNS layer, as well as geographic routing and steering. So all of those things exist, and those are defined under the traffic tab. And in here for load balancing, it's pretty straightforward. There's a little wizard that walks you through how this looks. I can create a load balancer. The first thing it'll ask me is what is the DNS name that I want this to exist on? And then it'll say, okay, do I want session affinity for this particular item? Session affinity just is related to the proxy setting, and it's, do you want us to insert a cookie so that this user gets the same, gets redirected to the same data center every single time? Here, I'm just gonna go with DNS only. You'll see here, I can select pools in the origin. So I can create an origin pool, and I can define what region this is associated with, or whatever label or host name I wanna give it. So I can define, label 1. I can give it a name in this particular case. So I can say like IAD, and I could do, let's say, SFO. I can say, okay, just this IP, this one, and then I can give them weights. So I can give one a weight here, another a weight here, and you'll notice that it automatically populates out the percentages of what that will look like. This health threshold value means if I assign a health check or monitor to this particular pool, what does it take for this pool to be considered healthy? If one IP goes down, should this pool be marked unhealthy in total, or do I need two of these IP addresses to go down in order for this pool to be unhealthy? You can define monitors if you want to set up a monitor. There are a few that are automatically configured here that we've pre-built, but basically you can set GET requests, you can test on IP, you can do DNS tests, you can do TCP connection tests. Any of those can be used to define what criteria you have that say whether this IP is up or not. And then you can also select what regions you want to test from in terms of your health. You can set a notification email. So for anything that I define here, if I want to say there's an operations group or a particular group of people that I want to receive a notification for, this is what you would set, and then they would receive a notification whenever anything went down or there was some failover event that took place. Hit save. Now it's gonna ask me to if I need to add any more origin pools. For example, if I wanted to set maybe a label 13 and I wanted 2 sets of origins here on the East Coast, 2 sets of origins on the West Coast. That's one way you could define this. Go over. This is just say, this is what the health checks are that you defined. Do you want to modify these health checks? And then traffic steering. So you can do dynamic steering. So we route to traffic based on the way the pools respond. So the faster the pool responds, we can make that the primary pool that we respond with. Geo steering, if we want to geographically route based on where the incoming request is. Or random, we can just select a random healthy pool that exists. So if you have multiple actives and a few passives, random might make sense. But in this case, we're only using one pool, so we're going to set off. We're just going to route pools in the correct failover order. And lastly, you get this review tab, and this review shows you everything: the load balancer name, the status of the pool and how it's performing, a fallback in case this pool fails. Is there a host name or an IP address that I want to fall back to? What health checks exist and what you're performing in terms of health checks, and then lastly, what your traffic steering looks like. You can save it or save and deploy it. In this case, I'll save and deploy it. And now it's an active health monitor pool in here. And I can define what TTL values I want for it. And that's how you set up load balancing on Cloudflare in less than 5 minutes. All right, and with that, I'm going to stop the demo right now, and I'm going to hand it back to Dina.
Thank you, Chris. Let me present my screen real quick. Sorry, this is taking me a minute, but does anybody have any questions?
We do have a couple questions in so far, but there is enough time for a couple more questions. If anybody has any, just use the GoToWebinar control panel and submit them. And why don't we just go ahead and dive into the questions we have right now. First question here: are there any record types that are ignored with the import scan?
There are no record types that are ignored. We try to capture every record we can based on hostname values that we see. So there are no records that should be ignored. And if you upload the zone file, the zone file that's uploaded is exhaustive. So we'll capture every record that you upload.
All right, great. Next question here. Secondary DNS options are available on what service level?
This is currently only available on our enterprise plan.
Okay. Next question here. Why does Cloudflare recommend using secondary DNS servers for performance and DDoS protection, yet not provide a standard AXFR mechanism to another cloud DNS service when Cloudflare is primary?
This is currently on our roadmap. We do want to be able to support Cloudflare as an authoritative DNS provider and send out DNS record transfers to other providers. However, we do not support that today, but we can help you set it up with us as a secondary. And once we do have that functionality, we can switch over to Cloudflare as your authoritative and have your other DNS providers as a secondary.
All right, great. There's enough time, guys. If you have a question, please go ahead and submit it. Next question here. Let's see. I'm not sure if you guys have time to do this, but would you please show us how to configure a mail server behind a proxy domain URL? That one we may not have enough time, but.
Yeah, we don't quite have enough time for that. But basically, to give you an idea of what that would look like, that mail server actually, all the requests that come into a mail server in terms of proxy settings themselves wouldn't make a lot of sense because mail server doesn't live on port 80 or port 443 where all the proxy configuration would be. The MX records you can absolutely configure very easily, either via import or just creating an MX record. But if you wanted to proxy a mail server record or proxy a mail server for DDoS reasons or just to make sure that it's no longer a vulnerability point in your infrastructure, we can do that. There's an application we build called Spectrum, where we define what the ports are that we see traffic across. So the mail server doesn't exist on port 80, port 443, but we would build the Spectrum app that would live and listen on whatever port the mail server has, and then we would just set that up to proxy traffic through the Spectrum app itself.
All right. Okay, next question here. Can you provide a link to documentation that describes configuration of a multi-master setup? John, I'm sure if they can't pull it together, I'm sure they'll be more than happy to provide it with you offline. The second part of your question, how are proxied addresses handled?
So in a multi-master configuration, the challenge you're going to have in terms of proxy configurations, and usually one of the reasons we see multi-master is because someone is using something like multi-CDN. So if you proxy on our end, the problem that you would always have is if Cloudflare is doing proxying and we're overwriting those DNS entries, those DNS entries in the other provider would not be overwritten, right? So you would either have to rewrite those entries on the other provider with the Cloudflare IP space so that customers would connect to us, or if you're using multi-CDN, then it's perfectly fine. You would just use us as an authoritative, some other CDN as an authoritative, and then you would use their proxy as well as ours simultaneously. And customers would just receive different CDNs based on which DNS vendor they happen to hit.
Excellent. Okay, next question. Do you allow creation of custom record types?
We do not allow this currently, but I would be interested to know what kind of record type you would like to create.
All right, so Casey, I'm sure folks from Cloudflare will be following up with you offline to maybe get some more information from you. Okay, we're about 8 minutes to the top of the hour. I think we have time for 2 or 3 more questions here. Here's the next one. Is role-based access available at self-service levels, or is that an enterprise feature?
That's an enterprise level feature.
Yes.
All right, great. And what is, next question, what is a solution suitable if both primarily and secondary DNS goes off?
So in the event that both your primaries and secondaries fail, and that's especially if you're in some sort of configuration where you have multiple providers, that's highly unlikely. I'm not saying it's impossible that it could happen, but at that point, if you were to have 2 providers with geographically distributed data centers both simultaneously go down at the same time, you could always include a tertiary. That is a backup. You could set some tertiary backup or some tertiary provider that you would use in the event that happened if absolute uptime was of utmost necessity. But I would assume that if 2 providers went down simultaneously, despite totally different architectures and data centers, that there's some wide-ranging enormous problem where DNS availability probably isn't your primary concern at that point. There's some widespread disaster. But it is possible to include a tertiary if you absolutely must have that kind of resiliency in place.
All right, great. Let's see. Next question. We've gotten so many great questions and this is awesome. Okay, next question. How about DNS tunneling security? Is that being addressed on the Cloudflare DNS service?
So it's not done through inbound, which is almost exclusively what we've talked about so far, but we do have the ability to fix that through a product we have called Cloudflare Gateway, which is part of Cloudflare Teams. Cloudflare Gateway is our recursive DNS product that does attempt to address the tunneling and outbound malicious requests that can happen. So in Cloudflare Gateway, what we do is we give you an IP space where you forward your DNS queries to. It does the recursive resolver lookups. And then it also does a few things. So it looks at what the name or the IP space is that's being returned. It can flag those as malicious to prevent users from accidentally going to places they're not supposed to, or for outbound DNS requests to hit that. We also do some tunneling capability that we limit. So if someone is trying to use DNS as a way to send out DNS queries and exfiltrate information, it can also limit that. We haven't talked about that in any of this discussion, but that might be a good future webinar that we could hold.
Awesome. All right, great. So let's do one more quick question, then we'll go ahead and close it out. What is the Cloudflare support format in India?
So we have data centers that are in India. So you've got localized facilities there where we would answer queries from. Additionally, we do have a 24/7 support staff. So if you had questions around Cloudflare or issues with something that was going on, we do have a follow the sun model with people from around the world who can help assist with queries or problems. They have phone, email, chat if there were any issues. So they're more than happy to help and step in for someone in that time zone who would need support directly. But in terms of the user interface and everything else is also available directly out of India. I don't believe, Dina, that we have localization in India. Is that correct for the UI?
We do not, but we are working on adding different languages to it.
There you go.
All right, excellent. Okay, well, we are about 4 minutes to the top of the hour, so we're going to have to close out the question and answer period. Thank you to everybody who did submit questions, and if for some reason we did not get to your question, I apologize, but the folks at Cloudflare will be getting a copy of all of the questions that came in, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to follow up with you offline, including those questions that did automatically require some follow-up there. So before we close things out, I did at the top of the hour mention that we would be doing a drawing for two $50 Amazon gift cards. So without further ado, let's go ahead and do that now. Today's winners are, let's see, first one is Ken W. Congratulations, Ken. And our second winner today is Stella M. Congratulations, Stella. We'll be following up with the both of you offline via email to get your Amazon gift card over to you. So please check your inbox. And I also want to remind the audience that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of it, or if you just want to watch it again, you will have the opportunity to do so. Following the webinar today, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the devops.com website. So you can always go find it there. Just go to devops.com/webinars and look in the on-demand section. It should be right there waiting for you. Dina and Chris, thank you so much for a great presentation, lots of great information, and judging from the amount of questions that we got from the audience, lots of good stuff there. So thanks again, appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
All right, I also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe.